even though it says employees not allowed in the shop, we're bringing you some behind-the-scenes stuff out here in the shop with Rick from Dan's Driveline here in Las Vegas.
All right, so this is, our shop's divided up in two sections. Typically, out here we do some fab work and mostly gear work, differentials, transmissions, and transfer cases. We're not nearly as custom as is your shop, but we can get down and do some stuff as well. Show you a little bit over here on the C10 project of a custom shaft we did for that has something I can point out that may be some help to some builders out there. It has an airbag suspension. Customer wanted it to sit all the way on the ground when the airbags are lowered completely. So with that, provide some obstacles for putting a drive shaft in it. Some of these trucks came with a two-piece. Most of them, the short bed models, came with a one-piece. And keeping driveline angles so that you don't get a shudder from takeoff is somewhat of a challenge, because the trailing arm style rear suspension induces pinion angle change that you may not have if you have a 4-bar suspension. And this is already a good suspension. It works real good going down the road, but because of the airbags, you can ride at multiple different ride heights. It's hard to set it up for one particular spot where the thing will ride smooth. So that brings me to this shaft that we have here, which has got a CV head on the front of it. They call that a double cardon style CV. And what that will do is it minimizes the actual angle that either one of these two U-joints see. So that when I set up the rear suspension, I set up the rear portion of it, essentially pointed the pinion yoke at the transmission, and let the CV head soak up all the angle. So as this thing, whether it's fully compressed or fully rebounded, all that angle is going to go through this CV head, and that will minimize any shudder that you feel at takeoff. Typically what you feel on a shaft that has too much driveline angle is right from takeoff you'll have a vibration you can feel through the whole vehicle. And that's as this driveline is spinning, it's slightly speeding up and slowing down every revolution 2 times. And the CV head removes some of that. So this thing, despite being set up for a 4-inch ride height, it should ride as smooth as it was stock and not have any issues going down the road. This is a little bit of a custom piece. This CV head slip yoke was never offered as an OEM piece, so this is only found in the aftermarket.
And I always say it at my shop that there's a lot of things that you don't want to skimp on, and a drive shaft is just that. This is why we're here at Dan's Driveline, because they build all of our custom shafts. Yeah, you can spend days and days and go to the junkyard and finding pieces and parts and all kinds of stuff, and it's probably going to work for a little while, but not in the long run.
Well, we're in the driveline room now. Come from the gear shop. This is where we build and balance and build the drive shafts that we talked about earlier. Some of the stuff I'll show you around back here this is how we can build all the drive lines out of the same machine. There's all the different fixtures, or many of them, to build whatever it is, all the way from huge stuff like this that would be under a big semi-truck to tiny little stuff that would be in a PTO shaft, but they all have the same socket on the back that allow it to go into the fixture, and our machine will press it and weld it, and I'll show you that. So this is a driveline balancer. This is one made by Line. There's a few different models out there, different companies. It's not a huge market, as you may know. A lot of people never even think about a drive shaft until it's time to have one made. So this is what a driveline machine looks like. This one is a balancer and a press welder at the same time. So on one end, it's got a 10-ton press that air over hydraulic that will allow you to force the weld yokes into the tubing. And that's something sometimes people don't realize, Tim, is that the weld yoke is a press fit into the tubing. Mm-hmm. And so not only is it welded, it's pressed in place. And then after we measure the amount of run out, we can unlock these heads and this will float. And that allows us to then spin this up at speed. The dial indicator shows you how much movement you have in this floating head. That assists in how much weight to add. And then there's a strobe light. There's a set of contacts in here that illuminate a strobe light. Will tell us where to put the weight. And then it's a bit of trial and error on how much weight to add. And you can slide it around and clock it on the tubing and get a good balance. This machine will spin up to 3,300 RPM, which in most cars with a somewhere between a 3.0 and a 4.0 rear diff ratio is freeway speeds and faster. Something that's a race car that has like a 513 rear gear, you have a lot faster driveline speeds. And this won't necessarily tell us what it's doing at 6,000 RPM, but typically if you have a shaft that's smooth up through 3,300, if you've got a problem, you already have it at that speed, and you won't need to spin it much faster. I've mentioned DOM tubing a few times. You know what that is?
I do, but I know a lot of people that's probably watching this at home have no idea what you mean when you say that.
DOM tubing refers to drawn over mandrel, meaning this is still a welded seam tube, but then it is drawn, a mandrel's drawn through it that reduces the seam that's in here. If you look at it, let's see on this side, you can still see where the seam is at, but it's not nearly as prominent. That reduces the amount of stress riser that's in that area, keeps the tube straighter, so there's less run out, and typically makes for a better drive shaft, better anything. A lot of roll cage guys that are building stuff will use DOM. People that are making suspension stuff use DOM. You can make a drive shaft out of a different tubing, but it's not as good. This adds a little bit of price to the cost of the drive shaft. You can see on this one it says made in the USA. We attempt to get as much made in the USA components as we can. Unfortunately, these days that's not always the case. But we found for this 3.5 083 is what we make most of our trophy truck shafts out of. This stuff is a little bit better than the stuff that's made overseas, and the price is a minor increase, so we use that where we can.
Here's a little bit. We're still behind the scenes at Dan's Driveline, and you can see this is the rack of all the tubing they make for the different sizes of drive shafts, and Brick's going to tell you about what some of the different sizes is used for.
Again, like I said, we make stuff for semi-trucks. That would be the larger heavy wall, 134 thousandths wall thickness, 4-inch tubing. The most common stuff that you're going to see in over-the-road, passenger cars and light-duty trucks, anywhere from 2.5 to about 3.5-inch steel tubing. The smaller stuff would be for PTOs, some front drive shafts, unlike Jeeps. The square tubing is not for drive shafts. That's for stuff around the shop. And then there's a tiny bit of roll bar material up there for a race car I'm going to build. And if we got a little time, we're going to talk about that later. Hopefully we can. A couple other details. This is a trophy truck race shaft that's in just for a little bit of maintenance. But the reason why this one is painted white is because some sanctioning bodies require that racing shafts are white, so that if you're on an asphalt or dirt surface and a competitor loses a drive shaft, someone else doesn't come around and damage their car by one laying on the track. So, like I say, this is for an off-road trophy truck, and it's white for a reason. If you look down at the other end here, there's a couple of arrows. You have any idea what those are for, Tim?
I don't.
They are so that if you do some maintenance to this, pull the slip yoke off, because this shaft is splined but not keyed, to make sure the slip yoke goes back on in the same relationship to one another so it maintains the balance.
Oh, that makes sense. So another thing that they have here that a lot of people don't know that Dan's Driveline has here is they actually have an engine dyno in the very back of the shop. So Brick's going to tell us a little bit about that.
This is, like Tim says, an engine dyno. There's a couple different types. A lot of people are familiar with a chassis dyno that will test the engine while it's still in the car. This is not that type. This tests at the back of the engine. This is one we've had for quite a while. We don't promote that we do this all that much. This is a good resource for us and our racing customers. And it literally measures horsepower by the amount of force put through that absorber, they call it, and it creates a whole bunch of hot water and steam, and it's measured in the other room. And we've tested some neat stuff here. If you search real hard on YouTube, you might find when we tested the 1,000 horsepower engine for the latest model Shelby GT 1000, they called it, the 1000 Series Mustang. Being that Shelby's out here in Las Vegas, they did their testing on their engine here in-house. They kind of took over the place for about a month and did all their testing here. So if you search real hard, you might find some of that. We haven't had any catastrophic failures in here, so there's nothing real, no dyno fail videos, luckily. I think the worst that ever happened was a balancer come apart and scarred a cabinet. But other than that, just business as usual, and do a little bit of dyno testing sometimes.